My name is Ethan Sullivan, 34, and I've spent my entire life living in my brother Mason's shadow. While he became the golden child with the corner office and seven-figure salary, I was just a struggling entrepreneur with big ideas but empty pockets. At least that's how everyone saw me. The night of his engagement party at the Fairmont Copley Plaza, Mason raised his glass and did what he always does, put me down to lift himself higher. But this time I came prepared, clutching a small gift-wrapped box that would change everything between us. Before I tell you what happened next, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. Hit that like button and subscribe to hear how I finally stood up to my brother after 30 years of living in his shadow. Growing up with Mason Sullivan wasn't easy. Being 3 years younger meant I was always playing catch-up, always the little brother, even when we became adults. Our childhood home in suburban Boston wasn't fancy, a modest 4-bedroom colonial in a good school district that our parents, Richard and Susan Sullivan, stretched their budget to afford. Dad worked as an accounting manager at a local manufacturing company, while Mom taught second grade at the elementary school. They were hardworking, practical people who valued stability and traditional success, qualities they saw flourishing in Mason but somehow missing in me. From my earliest memories, Mason had a talent for making everything a competition and ensuring he always won. I still remember my first real victory, winning a small trophy at the local science center's junior engineering contest when I was 9. I'd built a miniature wind turbine that actually generated enough electricity to light a small bulb. It wasn't much, but it was mine. The trophy sat proudly on my dresser for exactly 3 days before I came home from school to find it shattered on the floor. It was an accident, Mason claimed, barely looking up from his homework. I was getting something from your room and bumped into it. Mom simply swept up the pieces while Dad told me not to make such a fuss. Mason said it was an accident, Ethan. Besides, it's just a little plastic trophy. But I had seen the slight smile on Mason's face when he thought no one was looking. The pattern continued throughout our childhood. In 7th grade, I spent weeks working on a science fair project about solar energy, building a small solar oven that could actually toast a marshmallow. The night before the fair, I found my carefully labeled diagram soaked with water, the ink running in blue rivers across my poster board. Must have been when I spilled my water bottle in the garage, Mason said with a shrug. You shouldn't have left your project where someone could accidentally damage it. I stayed up all night remaking everything, arriving at school exhausted. I took 3rd place. Mason's project on bacterial growth won first. By high school, our paths had diverged sharply. Mason was the student body president, captain of the debate team, and headed for valedictorian. I gravitated toward computer science and creative projects that didn't fit neatly into academic boxes. I had friends, did okay in classes, but never achieved the spotlight like Mason. At his graduation, I sat between our beaming parents as Mason delivered his valedictorian speech. It was perfectly crafted, as all his performances were. Success comes to those who plan and execute, he told the crowd, his voice confident and measured. While dreamers may have beautiful visions, it's the doers who change the world. Some look at clouds and see shapes, others build the airplanes that fly through them. Our parents didn't notice how he glanced at me during the dreamers part. But I did. College only widened the gap between us. Mason attended Wharton on a partial scholarship, supplemented by our parents emptying most of their savings. I went to UMass Amherst for computer science, with minimal financial support since Mason's education was an investment that would pay off. The unspoken implication was that mine might not. During my sophomore year, I developed a basic algorithm for improving database security, nothing revolutionary, but promising enough that my professor suggested I develop it further. Excited, I shared my work with Mason during his visit home for Christmas. That's actually pretty interesting, he said, showing rare enthusiasm for one of my projects. Can you send me the documentation? I have some friends in tech who might want to take a look. 3 months later, I discovered through a classmate that a startup associated with Mason's business school was implementing a remarkably similar security protocol. When confronted, Mason was dismissive. Ideas are cheap, Ethan. Execution is what matters. Their implementation is completely different from your concept anyway. This is business, you need to toughen up. I couldn't prove anything, but that was the first time I realized my brother wouldn't just compete with me, he would take from me if it served his purposes. 5 years ago, Mason was already making his mark at Crestview Partners, a boutique investment firm specializing in tech acquisitions. His LinkedIn updates were a steady stream of achievements, promotions, deals closed, industry recognition. Meanwhile, I was on my third failed startup. My first venture out of college was a campus food delivery app that gained traction at UMass but fell apart when our main competitor secured major funding and expanded aggressively. The second was a freelance coding platform that never quite found its market. But my third attempt, SecureStream, was different. It was built around an evolved version of my college security algorithm, now developed into a comprehensive data protection system. SecureStream showed real promise. We had a small but growing user base, positive industry feedback, and interest from several local investors. I had assembled a talented team, 2 developers I'd worked with previously and a marketing specialist who believed in our vision. For 6 months, everything was moving in the right direction. Then came the funding crunch of 2018. Several potential investors pulled out simultaneously as the venture capital market tightened. We needed a bridge investment to reach our next development milestone and secure a larger funding round. Out of options, I swallowed my pride and called Mason. By then, he was handling technology investments worth millions. We met at an upscale Boston restaurant where he arrived 20 minutes late, ordered the most expensive wine on the menu, and then spent 15 minutes taking a call before finally turning his attention to me. "So little brother needs a bailout," he said, smirking slightly as he swirled his wine. I explained SecureStream's potential, our growth metrics, and our development roadmap. I wasn't asking for charity, just an introduction to appropriate investors or a small stake that would help us bridge the gap. Mason leaned back in his chair, studying me with the same expression he'd had when examining my broken trophy years earlier. "The technology seems adequate. But your business model is fundamentally flawed. Your pricing structure is too low, your target market too diffuse, and frankly, your team lacks the experience to scale effectively." "We have paying customers and growing demand," I countered. "We just need runway to reach profitability." "Everyone needs runway, Ethan. What makes you special?" He sighed and set down his glass. "Look, I'd love to help, but I can't put my reputation on the line for a shaky venture. Clean up your business plan, pivot to enterprise clients, and maybe we can talk again in 6 months. "In 6 months we'll be gone," I said. "Then maybe that's the market telling you something." He signaled for the check. "This is why I've always told you to focus on execution over ideas. Ideas without proper execution are just fantasies." 3 weeks later, SecureStream ran out of money. I had to let my team go and shut down operations. For months afterward, I took whatever coding jobs I could find, building websites for local businesses, doing freelance troubleshooting, even teaching basic programming at a community center. Anything to keep the lights on while I tried to figure out my next move. It was during one of those teaching sessions that I met Walter Hayes. At 72, Walter was the oldest student in my coding for seniors class, but also the sharpest. After the third session, he stayed behind and asked questions that revealed a deep understanding of technology well beyond the basic material I was teaching. "You know, for someone teaching HTML basics, you have an interesting way of explaining database architecture," he said with a knowing smile. It turned out Walter wasn't just any retiree looking to learn about computers. He was Walter Hayes, founder of Hayes Systems, a pioneer in database management who had sold his company to Oracle in the early 2000s and had been quietly investing in promising technologies ever since. Over coffee, I told him about SecureStream and showed him the core architecture on my laptop. Walter asked pointed questions, challenged my assumptions, and finally nodded appreciatively. "You've got something valuable here, son. Not perfect, but valuable. Why did you shelve it? I explained our funding collapse and the subsequent shutdown. Walter listened without interruption, then asked, "What would you do differently if you could start over?" For the next 2 hours, we discussed refinements to both the technology and business approach. By the time we finished our third cup of coffee, Walter made me an offer, modest funding to restart development with a lean approach, focused solely on perfecting the core algorithm before considering commercialization. "I'm not interested in another rush startup," he said. "I want to see if you can solve the fundamental security problem you've identified. Business comes later." For the next 2 years, I worked primarily from my apartment, occasionally meeting with Walter to review progress. The algorithm evolved from a security protocol into something more fundamental, a new approach to data integrity verification that could detect and prevent unauthorized modifications to critical information. What made our breakthrough particularly valuable was its efficiency. It required minimal computing resources while providing security that would take quantum computers years to break. Perfect for everything from financial transactions to medical records. 3 months ago, while scanning industry news, I noticed an announcement from Crestview Partners about their investment in a new security protocol developed by Nexus Technologies. The press release included technical details that sounded eerily familiar. A little digging revealed that Nexus had been acquired by Crestview the previous year, right around the time Mason had become partner. I sent the information to Walter, who had his own technical team review it. "There are substantial similarities to your core architecture," Walter confirmed after their analysis. "Not an exact copy, but close enough that I'd be concerned. Do you think your brother might have used my original concept as a starting point?" "It wouldn't be the first time," I replied, remembering the college incident. Walter was quiet for a moment. "Well, the good news is that your current implementation has evolved well beyond that starting point. In fact, I think we're ready to file for patent protection and begin approaching potential licensees." As Walter's team prepared our patent application, I couldn't stop thinking about Mason's potential involvement with the Nexus technology. Had he remembered my college algorithm all these years? Or had he somehow gotten access to Secure Stream's architecture during our funding discussions? Either way, it seemed my brother might have built part of his success on my work, again, while publicly maintaining that I was just a dreamer who couldn't execute. The invitation arrived on heavy cream cardstock, embossed with silver lettering and tied with a silk ribbon. "Mason Sullivan and Amber Whitfield request the pleasure of your company to celebrate their engagement." The venue was the Grand Ballroom at the Fairmont Copley Plaza, one of Boston's most exclusive hotels. Dress code, black tie optional. RSVP required. I tossed it onto my kitchen counter alongside my bills and takeout menus. For 3 days, I deliberately ignored it, until my friend Michael spotted it while grabbing beers from my fridge. "Fancy invitation," he commented, examining the thick paper. "Your brother's engagement, huh? You going?" "Haven't decided," I muttered, though in truth, I'd already resolved to skip it. The last thing I needed was to stand awkwardly in a room full of Mason's successful friends and colleagues, answering the inevitable questions about what I was doing with my life. Michael knew enough about my history with Mason to understand my reluctance. "Might be good for networking," he suggested half-heartedly. "Yeah, because Mason's circle has been so helpful to me in the past," I replied sarcastically. "Fair point." Michael hesitated, then added, "Did you hear he made partner at Crestview? It was in the Boston Business Journal last month." I hadn't known, but I wasn't surprised. Mason's ascent had always seemed inevitable. "Amber's family owns half of Back Bay real estate," Michael continued. "This isn't just a wedding, it's a merger." That tracked with my limited impression of Amber Whitfield, whom I'd met exactly once at our parents' house the previous Christmas. Tall, blonde, and polished to perfection, she'd regarded me with the vague discomfort of someone encountering an exotic but potentially diseased animal. "So what do you do exactly?" she'd asked, maintaining a careful distance. Before I could answer, Mason had swooped in. "Ethan's between ventures at the moment. He's very creative, always has been." but still finding his path. The patronizing tone made me sound like a directionless teenager rather than a 33-year-old developer. The rest of that holiday visit had been equally uncomfortable, with my parents fawning over Amber and Mason while directing concerned glances my way. Their words to me later were predictable. "Why can't you settle into something stable like your brother? He's offering to help, you know. You should take his advice." 2 days after Michael spotted the invitation, my mother called. "Did you get Mason's invitation? He hasn't received your RSVP. I'm not sure I can make it." I hedged. "Ethan Sullivan," she said in the tone that had intimidated me since childhood. "This is your brother's engagement. Family comes first, regardless of your differences." "Mom, it's not about differences. It's about. I don't want to hear excuses. Your father and I expect you to be there, looking presentable and supportive." "Mason specifically asked if you were coming?" That surprised me. "He did?" "Of course he did. You're his only brother." She paused. "He also mentioned he might have some business connections that could help you, if you're ready to accept guidance." There it was, the real reason for the invitation. Another opportunity for Mason to demonstrate his generosity toward his struggling brother. Another public reminder of our respective positions in life. "I'll think about it," I said noncommittally. "Don't think too long. The RSVP deadline is Friday." After ending the call, I was leaning strongly toward not attending when Walter called with unexpected advice. "You should go," he said when I mentioned the invitation. "Why would I subject myself to that?" "Because success is the best revenge, and we're on the verge of something significant," Walter replied. "Besides, I've always found it valuable to observe competitors in their natural habitat." "Mason's not my competitor, he's my brother," I said automatically. Walter's silence spoke volumes. "Okay, maybe he is both," I admitted. "You know, in my experience, people who need to constantly demonstrate their superiority are usually compensating for something," Walter observed. "Secure, confident people don't need to put others down." His words stayed with me as I contacted an industry colleague who had connections to Crestview's technology investments. What he told me confirmed my suspicions. The security protocol Mason's firm had invested in shared fundamental architecture with my college work. The Nexus technology was apparently brought to Crestview by Mason Sullivan himself. My contact explained. "Word is he's been leveraging it for his rise to partner. Big clients are very interested." That night, I made my decision. I would attend the engagement party, but not as the pathetic younger brother everyone expected. I began planning meticulously, gathering documentation, preparing evidence, and considering every possible scenario. 2 nights before the party, I realized I had nothing appropriate to wear. My wardrobe consisted primarily of jeans, t-shirts, and the occasional button-down for meetings with Walter. Nothing remotely approaching black tie optional. "Borrow my suit," Michael offered when I called him in a panic. "We're about the same size, and it's actually decent quality. My sister's wedding," he explained. The night before the engagement party, I carefully packed a small gift box with a USB drive containing very specific files, along with printed documentation. I added a handwritten note, then wrapped everything in silver paper that matched the invitation and tied it with a simple black ribbon. Whatever happened tomorrow night, I was finally ready to face my brother as an equal. The Fairmont Copley Plaza gleamed with old-world luxury as I handed my borrowed Honda Civic to the valet, who barely concealed his disdain. Inside, the grand ballroom had been transformed into a showcase of wealth and taste. Crystal chandeliers reflected in polished marble floors, elaborate floral arrangements in silver vessels, a string quartet playing in the corner. I clutched my wrapped gift box like a shield as I navigated through clusters of guests and designer evening wear. "Ethan? Ethan Sullivan?" A vaguely familiar voice pulled me from my daze. Aunt Catherine, my father's sister, approached with the uncertain smile of someone who recognizes you but isn't quite sure from where. "My goodness, it's been years! You look healthy." It was clear she'd been about to say I looked different, but thought better of it. I didn't blame her. The last time we'd seen each other had been at my grandfather's funeral 5 years ago, when I was at my lowest after Secure Stream's collapse. Good to see you, Aunt Catherine. How's Uncle David? Oh, retired now and loving it. We're in Florida most of the year. She leaned in conspiratorially. What about you? Your mother mentioned you were between opportunities. And so it began. For the next 20 minutes, I endured variations of the same conversation with relatives and family friends, each interaction a delicate dance around my apparent failure to launch. I deflected questions with vague responses about consulting and development work, watching their interest fade as quickly as it had appeared. I was pouring myself a much-needed scotch at the bar when I felt a heavy hand on my shoulder. Sullivan the Lesser! You actually showed up. Bradley Winters, Mason's business partner and friend since Wharton, grinned at me with perfect white teeth. I had $50 in the office pools saying you'd find an excuse to bail. You guys have an office pool about me? I'm flattered, I replied, forcing a smile. Mason said you'd be sarcastic. Bradley signaled the bartender for a drink. So what are you working on these days? Still doing the computer thing? Something like that. You know, Mason's always saying you're the smart one. Just needs some direction. Bradley accepted his martini with a nod. If you ever want to get serious, I know some people looking for technical talent. Nothing fancy, but steady work. The condescension was so thick I could have cut it with a knife. I'll keep that in mind. Do that. He clapped my shoulder again. Now if you'll excuse me, I see the Whitfield contingent has arrived. Potential clients. He moved away toward a group of silver-haired men in impeccable tuxedos. I spotted Mason and Amber making their entrance, pausing every few steps to accept congratulations. Amber was stunning in a champagne-colored gown that probably cost more than my annual rent, her diamond engagement ring catching the light with every graceful gesture. Mason, in a custom tuxedo, looked every inch the successful finance executive, confident, polished, and completely in his element. Amber noticed me first, her smile faltering slightly before she composed herself. She whispered something to Mason, whose eyes found mine across the room. He nodded in acknowledgement but made no move to approach, continuing his circuit of the room with Amber on his arm. They make a beautiful couple, my mother said, appearing beside me. She wore a new dress and had clearly had her hair professionally styled for the occasion. My father stood slightly behind her, uncomfortable in his rarely worn suit but beaming with pride. Mason said they're considering a June wedding at the Whitfield estate on Nantucket. Sounds perfect, I replied neutrally. Ethan, my father began in his serious voice. Your mother and I were talking, and we think. Dad, please. Not tonight. We just want to see you settled, my mother interjected. Mason has offered multiple times to help you find something suitable, and you keep refusing. Pride is all well and good, but at some point. Mom, I interrupted firmly. I appreciate the concern, but I'm doing fine. Better than fine, actually. She exchanged a skeptical look with my father. Well, I hope you'll at least be pleasant tonight. This is an important event for your brother. The Whitfields are very well connected. Before I could respond, they were already moving away to greet relatives, leaving me alone again with my scotch and gift box. From my position near the bar, I observed Mason working the room like the skilled performer he was, laughing at the right moments, expressing appropriate gratitude, making each person feel momentarily special before moving on to the next. It was a talent he'd perfected since childhood. He's good, isn't he? The voice beside me belonged to Trevor Wilson, a surprise I hadn't expected. Trevor had been Mason's friend in high school. Part of the popular crowd that had occasionally made my life difficult. Last I'd heard, he'd joined Mason at Crestview in some capacity. Very good, I agreed cautiously. Trevor sipped his beer, studying me with unexpected intensity. You know, I always thought you got a raw deal. Even back in high school. I raised an eyebrow. That's not how I remember you feeling at the time. He had the grace to look embarrassed. Yeah, well, I was an insecure kid trying to stay in with the cool crowd. Not my finest moments. He glanced around to ensure no one was listening. Between us, working for your brother isn't exactly a dream job either. No? Let's just say Mason hasn't changed much since high school. Still needs to be the star of the show, still takes credit where it isn't always due. Trevor's expression was unreadable. But that's probably not what you want to hear at his engagement party. Before I could respond, Trevor was called away by a colleague, leaving me with the distinct impression that all was not as perfect in Mason's world as it appeared. As dinner approached, I found myself seated at the farthest table from the head table, a placement that couldn't possibly have been accidental. I was surrounded by distant relatives and Amber's former college roommates, none of whom had any interest in conversing with Mason's underachieving brother. From across the room, I caught sight of a woman watching me with curious interest. She looked like a younger, less polished version of Amber, similar blonde hair but with a more natural style, wearing a blue dress that was elegant but not designer. When she realized I'd noticed her attention, she didn't look away but offered a small, almost conspiratorial smile. I learned later that this was Kayla Whitfield, Amber's younger sister by 3 years and apparently the family rebel. She approached me during the pre-dinner mingling. "You must be Ethan," she said without preamble. "The mysterious brother I've heard so little about." "That's me. And you're Kayla, the sister who constantly disappoints." She said it with a hint of pride. "I believe we're fellow black sheep. Is that our designation?" I couldn't help smiling. "Unofficially. Amber refers to you as Mason's creative brother in that tone that makes it sound like creative is code for unemployable." She raised her champagne glass. "To those who don't fit the plan." I clinked my scotch against her champagne. "How are you disappointing the Whitfield legacy? Non-profit work instead of law school. Environmental causes, if you can imagine the horror." Her smile faded slightly. "Can I ask you something potentially inappropriate? Those are usually the most interesting questions. What's Mason really like? As a brother?" She lowered her voice. "Amber's different since they've been together. More concerned with appearances. Less herself." The question caught me off guard with its directness. Before I could formulate a diplomatic response, the chime for dinner sounded, and Kayla was summoned by her mother to the family table. "Maybe we can continue this later," she said, squeezing my arm lightly before departing. As I took my seat at the distant table, I felt the weight of the gift box in my jacket pocket, and wondered if I was truly prepared for what would happen next. Dinner was a choreographed display of wealth and taste, 5 precisely executed courses paired with wines selected by a sommelier. From my distant table, I watched the head table like a theater performance, observing Mason in his element, charming, commanding, the center of attention. Between the main course and dessert, the speeches began. First came Bradley, Mason's best man-to-be, with a carefully calibrated mix of humor and admiration. When Mason sets his sights on something, whether it's a business deal or the perfect woman, he doesn't stop until he gets it. It's what makes him not just successful, but extraordinary. Next was Amber's father, Harold Whitfield, a silver-haired patriarch whose real estate empire had apparently survived the 2008 crash unscathed. In Mason, I've found not just a son-in-law but a kindred spirit, someone who understands that success is built on vision and decisive action. Several more speakers followed, each reinforcing the carefully constructed narrative of Mason's brilliance and inevitable success. I remained silent, sipping my scotch and waiting. Finally, Mason himself stood, accepting the microphone with practiced humility. "Thank you all for being here to celebrate not just our engagement, but the joining of 2 families and 2 legacies." He raised his glass toward the Whitfields. "To my future in-laws, who have welcomed me so warmly. To my parents, who taught me the value of hard work and determination." His gaze swept the room, pausing briefly as it passed over me. "Success has many definitions, but ultimately it comes down to choices. The choice to persist when others quit. The choice to act while others merely dream. Another pointed glance in my direction. Some of us rise to meet life's challenges, and some just exist. A ripple of uncomfortable laughter moved through the room. Most guests didn't catch the barb, but those who knew our history recognized it for what it was: another public diminishment, another assertion of his superiority. To my beautiful fiancée, Amber, Mason continued smoothly, thank you for choosing me. Our future together will be nothing short of exceptional. Applause filled the ballroom as Mason took his seat, accepting congratulations from those around him. The dessert course was served, some elaborate construction of chocolate and gold leaf, but I barely noticed it. My heart was pounding, my mouth dry. The moment I'd been planning for weeks had arrived, and suddenly I wasn't sure I could go through with it. Then I caught sight of my parents' faces, the naked pride as they gazed at Mason, the complete absorption of his narrative. I thought of Walter's words about true innovation and integrity. I remembered all the times Mason had taken credit for others' work, had stepped on someone to elevate himself. I stood up. The movement drew a few curious glances, but most guests were focused on their desserts or conversations. I withdrew the silver-wrapped box from my jacket pocket and began walking toward the head table. With each step, more heads turned, conversations quieted. By the time I reached Mason, a hush had fallen over the nearest tables. Mason looked up, annoyed at the interruption but maintaining his public smile. Ethan, enjoying yourself? Immensely, I replied, loud enough for nearby guests to hear. I wanted to personally congratulate you and Amber. And to give you this. I placed the gift box on the table before him. For the groom. Amber looked between us, sensing tension but maintaining her social smile. How thoughtful, Ethan. You didn't need to bring anything. Oh, but I did, I replied, not taking my eyes off Mason. It's something special. Something unique. Mason's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. You shouldn't have. I insist. Open it now. A few nearby guests were watching with interest. Mason clearly wanted to refuse, but doing so would seem petty and ungracious. With deliberate movements, he untied the black ribbon and removed the silver paper. He lifted the lid of the small box, his expression frozen as he saw the contents, a USB drive and several folded documents. What's this? He asked, his voice controlled but tight. It's evidence, I said simply, of where some of your success really comes from. Mason's eyes narrowed dangerously. This isn't the time or place for whatever game you're playing, Ethan. I remained calm. It's no game. That drive contains the original database security algorithm I developed in college, the one you asked me to share with your friends in tech. It also contains documentation of Secure Streams architecture, which you reviewed during our funding discussion 3 years ago. And finally, it contains technical specifications of the Nexus security protocol that Crestview invested in last year. I paused. The similarities are remarkable. Mason's face flushed, but he kept his voice low. You're embarrassing yourself. And me. The documentation is quite clear. I continued as if he hadn't spoken. My algorithm is at the core of the technology that helped you make partner. Technology you presented as a new discovery. Amber was looking between us with growing concern. Mason, what is he talking about? Nothing important. Mason assured her, trying to slide the box away, but I placed my hand on it. Actually, it is important, I said, raising my voice slightly so that more guests could hear. It's about integrity. About giving credit where it's due. Mason stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the marble floor. That's enough. You've always been jealous of my success, but this is a new low, even for you. I remained steady. I'm not here to create a scene, Mason. I'm not even here for revenge. Then what exactly are you here for? He demanded. Recognition. And to let you know that while you've been building your career on other people's ideas, I've been perfecting mine. I nodded toward the documents in the box. The original algorithm has evolved. Significantly. What does that mean? Amber asked, now fully engaged in the conversation. It means, came a voice from behind me. That your fiancé's company has been promoting technology with a problematic provenance. I turned to see Walter Hayes approaching, looking distinguished in a classic tuxedo. I hadn't expected him to be here. Walter Hayes. He introduced himself to Amber and the confused guests at the head table. I'm Ethan's business partner. Mason's expression shifted from anger to uncertainty. He clearly recognized Walter's name. Mr. Hayes, this is a private celebration and I wouldn't normally intrude, Walter finished smoothly. But when I received an invitation from Ethan, I was curious to meet the brother he's told me so much about. I hadn't invited Walter, but I was grateful for his presence. The truth is, Walter continued, I've invested considerably in Ethan's advanced version of this algorithm. The version that was just granted preliminary patent approval last week. This was news even to me. Walter had said we were close, but I hadn't known the application had progressed so quickly. Mason's face paled slightly. Patent approval? Indeed. And we've already licensed the technology to Sentinel Systems and Argo's Defense. Walter named two of Crestview's biggest competitors. They were quite impressed with the advancements Ethan has made to the core architecture. The murmurs around us grew louder as guests realized something significant was unfolding. My parents had made their way closer, confusion evident on their faces. What's going on? My father demanded. Ethan, you're disrupting your brother's celebration. Actually, Mr. Sullivan. Another voice joined in. Your son Ethan is finally getting the credit he deserves. Trevor Wilson stepped forward, a conflicted expression on his face. I've worked at Crestview for 3 years now. I was in the room when Mason presented the Nexus technology to our investment committee. I was also the one who digitized Ethan's original documentation for our files. He took a deep breath. The core architecture is clearly derived from Ethan's work. Mason's composure finally cracked. Trevor, you're fired. And you. He turned to me. You'll be hearing from our legal team. This is corporate espionage. It's not espionage when it's my own work, I replied calmly. And everything is thoroughly documented, including the timestamps on the original code and my communications with your firm. Amber placed a restraining hand on Mason's arm. Is this true? She asked quietly. Did you take your brother's work? Of course not. Mason snapped. This is a pathetic attempt to undermine me on what should be our night. Then explain the technical similarities. Walter challenged. They're rather specific. Bradley had made his way over during the confrontation. Mason, we should discuss this privately. He muttered, clearly concerned about the public spectacle. My mother looked stricken. Ethan, how could you do this tonight of all nights? Mom, this isn't what you think. I tried to explain. I'm not trying to hurt Mason. I just want. He wants what he's always wanted. Mason cut in bitterly. Attention. Unable to succeed on his own, he's trying to tear me down instead. That's not true, I said firmly. I've succeeded on my own terms. The algorithm has been patented under my name. The licensing deals are done. I don't need anything from you anymore, Mason. Then why are you here? He demanded. Because you've spent our entire lives taking credit for other people's work, including mine. I wanted you to know that it stops now. I turned to Amber. I'm sorry this had to happen tonight. Truly. But you deserve to know the truth about the man you're planning to marry. The ballroom had grown uncomfortably quiet. Guests at distant tables were standing to get a better view of the drama unfolding at the head table. Harold Whitfield had joined the group, his expression thunderous. Young man, he addressed me. I don't know what grievance you have with your brother, but this is hardly the appropriate venue. With respect, Mr. Whitfield, Walter interjected. When is the appropriate venue for addressing intellectual property theft? Your future son-in-law has built part of his career on stolen innovation. That speaks to character, which I imagine is of interest to your family. Mason's face flushed crimson. These are baseless accusations. We'll address them through proper channels. He turned to the increasingly uncomfortable guests. Please, everyone, enjoy your dessert. Family drama, you know how it is. His attempt at a dismissive laugh fell flat. Amber had withdrawn her hand from Mason's arm, her expression troubled. I think I need some air, she said quietly, standing and moving toward one of the ballroom's side exits. Her parents exchanged alarmed glances before following. Are you satisfied now? Mason hissed at me. You've ruined everything. I didn't ruin anything, Mason. Your choices did that. I picked up the box. Keep this. Review it carefully. Then we can talk about how to move forward. As I turned to leave, I caught sight of my parents. My father looked confused, my mother on the verge of tears. I'll explain everything later, I promised them. But everything I've said is documented and true. I made my way toward the exit, aware of the whispers and stares following me. I hadn't wanted a public confrontation, but perhaps it was inevitable given our history. At the door, Kayla Whitfield intercepted me. That was intense, she said quietly. Are you okay? I'm fine. I just needed to set the record straight. She nodded thoughtfully. For what it's worth, I believe you. Mason always seemed too perfect, you know? Nobody's that flawless without some kind of secret. As I left the ballroom, I felt lighter than I had in years. Whatever happened next, the truth was finally in the open. I had almost reached the hotel lobby when I heard rapid footsteps behind me. Ethan! Stop right there! Mason had followed me, his perfect composure completely shattered. His bow tie was askew, his face flushed with rage and perhaps something else, fear. You've always been jealous. He spat, grabbing my arm. Always resented my success. I removed his hand calmly. No, Mason. I resented your dishonesty. Your need to win at any cost, even if it meant taking credit for other people's work. You had ideas, I executed them. He snarled. Ideas are worthless without execution. I told you that. And now I've executed them myself. Better than you or your team could. For a moment I glimpsed something unexpected in my brother's eyes, not just anger, but a flash of something deeper. Vulnerability. Insecurity. You could never have done what I've done, he insisted, but his voice lacked conviction. Maybe not, I acknowledged. I couldn't have played the corporate game the way you do. Couldn't have been the person you are. But I've built something real, Mason. Something that's actually mine. What do you want from me? He asked, suddenly sounding tired. Money? Public acknowledgement? Revenge? Initially, maybe I did want revenge, I admitted. But now, I just want you to understand that your way isn't the only path to success. That taking shortcuts, taking from others, ultimately undermines whatever you build. Mason's shoulders slumped slightly, the fight draining out of him. For the first time in years, I saw my actual brother, not the perfect facade he presented to the world. The Nexus deal was supposed to be my legacy, he said quietly. My proof that I deserved partner. You could have built a legacy honestly. You don't understand the pressure. The expectations. I've always had to be perfect. No one expected perfection from you, Mason. That was something you created yourself. He looked away. So what happens now? You sue Crestview? Destroy my career? Amber's already texting that she needs time to think. I considered my next words carefully. That depends on you. We could go the legal route, which would be messy for everyone. Or we could find a solution that acknowledges the past while creating something better for the future. What does that mean? It means I'm willing to discuss licensing options with Crestview. Properly documented this time. It means you have the opportunity to do the right thing, even if it's difficult. Mason stared at me for a long moment, seeing me perhaps for the first time in years. I need to think. And talk to our legal team. Take your time. I've spent years developing this technology. I can wait a little longer for proper recognition. As Mason turned to return to his disrupted engagement party, I realized that whatever happened next, our relationship had fundamentally changed. The carefully maintained power dynamic of our entire lives had shifted, not because I had sought to destroy him, but because I had finally found my own path to success. The days following the engagement party passed in a blur of activity. Word spread quickly through Boston's tight-knit tech and finance communities about the confrontation between the Sullivan brothers. My phone rang constantly with calls from journalists, potential investors, and curious former colleagues trying to piece together what had happened. Walter was delighted with the unexpected publicity. "Sometimes a little drama is the best marketing," he observed as we reviewed another industry article mentioning our patent application. "We've had 3 more companies request meetings about licensing since the party." I was less enthusiastic about the attention. "This wasn't about marketing, Walter. It was about setting the record straight. And you've done that. Quite effectively." Walter leaned back in his chair, studying me. "But the question now is what happens with Mason and Crestview." We'd heard nothing official from Mason or his firm since the engagement party, though my industry contacts reported intense closed-door meetings and a notable drop in Crestview's stock price following rumors about the Nexus Technologies' origins. On the 3rd day, I received an unexpected email from Bradley Winters requesting a private meeting to discuss potential resolutions. Walter insisted on accompanying me and suggested neutral ground, a conference room at his attorney's office downtown. Bradley arrived alone, looking considerably less smug than he had at the engagement party. "This situation is unfortunate," he began after declining offers of coffee or water. "Mason has been placed on administrative leave pending an internal investigation." "That sounds serious," Walter observed neutrally. "The board takes intellectual property concerns very seriously." Bradley's carefully measured tone suggested extensive coaching from Crestview's legal team. "Our preliminary review indicates that while there are certain similarities between the Nexus protocol and your earlier work, there are also substantial differences and improvements. Improvements built on a foundation that wasn't theirs to use," Walter pointed out. Bradley nodded reluctantly. "That's one perspective. There are others." I leaned forward. "Where's Mason? Why isn't he here?" "Mason is taking some time to address personal matters." Bradley's expression gave nothing away. "The engagement has been postponed, if you must know." I felt a twinge of regret at that news, though not surprise. I never intended to disrupt his personal life. Nevertheless, that's what's happened. Bradley opened his briefcase and removed a folder. "Crestview is prepared to discuss a licensing agreement for your technology, both the original algorithm and the enhanced version. Our legal team has prepared some preliminary terms." Walter accepted the folder but didn't open it. "And what about proper attribution? Public acknowledgement of Ethan's contribution?" Bradley hesitated. "That's more complicated. A public statement could create liability issues." "It's not complicated at all," I interjected. "My work was used without permission or credit. That needs to be acknowledged." "I understand your position," Bradley replied carefully, "but I'm authorized to offer significantly improved financial terms in exchange for discretion regarding the origin story." Walter and I exchanged glances. "We'll review your proposal," Walter said, "but attribution is not negotiable. Ethan deserves recognition for his innovation." As Bradley departed with promises of continued dialogue, I found myself wondering again about Mason. Despite everything, he was still my brother, and his complete absence from these negotiations seemed uncharacteristic. My answer came later that evening in the form of a text message. "Can we talk?" "Not about business. Just brothers. We arranged to meet at a quiet bar in Cambridge, far from the financial district where Mason might be recognized. When I arrived, I almost didn't recognize him. Gone was the perfectly tailored suit and confident posture. Instead, Mason wore jeans and an untucked button-down, his hair slightly disheveled, dark circles under his eyes. "You look terrible," I said, sliding into the booth across from him. "Thanks." He attempted a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "You're looking well. Success agrees with you." We ordered drinks in awkward silence. When they arrived, Mason stared into his whiskey as if it might contain answers. Amber ended the engagement, he said finally. She said she couldn't build a life with someone she couldn't trust. Her father has pulled 3 major accounts from Crestview. I'm sorry about Amber, I said sincerely. That wasn't my intention. Mason shrugged. Maybe it's for the best. I'm not sure I was marrying her for the right reasons anyway. He took a long drink. The board is conducting a formal review. Best case scenario, I keep my job but lose partner status. Worst case, well, you can imagine. And the Nexus technology? Under review. Bradley's been tasked with damage control. Mason looked up at me directly. You've won, Ethan. Completely and totally. You've done what I never thought possible. You've beaten me at my own game. I shook my head. This isn't about winning or losing, Mason. It never was. No? Then what was it about? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks very much like revenge served ice cold. It was about finally being seen. About getting credit for my work instead of watching someone else, you, take it and claim it as your own. I leaned forward. Do you even remember the first time you did it? The algorithm in college? Mason looked away. I remember. Why? You were already successful. Already the golden child. Why take my work? He was quiet for so long I thought he might not answer. Because I was terrified of failing. He finally admitted, his voice barely audible. Everyone expected perfection from me. Mom, Dad, professors, friends, everyone. You were the creative one, the one who could fail and try again. I was the one who had to succeed the first time, every time. That was pressure you put on yourself, Mason. Was it? Every time I brought home an A, Dad would ask why it wasn't an A+. Every time I won something, there was always someone better I should be measuring myself against. He swirled his whiskey. When I saw your algorithm, I recognized its potential immediately. I also knew you wouldn't pursue it properly. You never did with your ideas. So I repurposed it. You stole it, I corrected. Yes. The admission seemed to cost him. I stole it. And later, elements of Secure Stream. I told myself it was justified because I could execute better than you could. That the end result would be better for everyone. Except for me. I didn't think you'd ever find out. Or if you did, that you'd do anything about it. Mason finished his drink. I underestimated you. I've been doing that our whole lives, apparently. The raw honesty was so unlike the brother I knew that I found myself momentarily speechless. Mason had always been the confident one, the perfect one. Seeing him vulnerable was disorienting. What happens now? I asked eventually. That depends on you, doesn't it? You hold all the cards. I considered this. Actually, I think we have an opportunity here. For both of us. Mason raised an eyebrow. I'm listening. Crestview needs this technology to remain competitive. We have the legitimate patent application and superior implementation. Instead of a protracted legal battle, what if we structured a proper collaboration? You understand the financial applications better than I do. I understand the technical architecture better than your team does. You'd be willing to work with me? After everything? Professionally, yes. With proper contracts, attribution, and transparency. Mason studied me with new respect. That's not what I expected you to say. I'm not interested in destroying you, Mason. I just wanted recognition for my work and to be treated as an equal. Equal, he repeated, as if testing the concept. That would be a significant adjustment for us. Long overdue, I'd say. He nodded slowly. I'll need to discuss this with the board. And there would be significant details to work out. Walter and I will want our attorneys involved in every step. Of course. Mason hesitated, then extended his hand across the table. For what it's worth, I am sorry, Ethan. Not just for taking your work, but for everything. The way I've treated you all these years. I accepted his handshake, feeling the weight of 3 decades of competition and resentment just beginning, to lift. We have a lot to work through. But this is a start. As we parted ways outside the bar, Mason paused. You know, there's something I've never told you. I was always jealous of you. Jealous? Of me? I couldn't hide my surprise. What could you possibly have been jealous of? Your freedom. Your creativity. Your ability to see possibilities where others don't. He smiled ruefully. And your integrity. I've spent my life climbing a ladder of success so focused on reaching the top that I never questioned how I was getting there. You built something real, something that's actually yours. With that unexpected confession, he walked away, leaving me to consider that perhaps neither of us had truly understood the other all these years. The following week brought a flurry of meetings with Crestview's executive team, attorneys from both sides, and technical experts evaluating their respective technologies. Trevor Wilson, who had not been fired despite Mason's threat, provided key documentation about how elements of my original work had been incorporated into the Nexus protocol. I should have spoken up sooner, he told me during a break in one of the marathon sessions. I knew it wasn't right, but Mason has a way of making you believe his version of reality. I understand that better than anyone, I assured him. Walter was in his element, negotiating terms and ensuring that my interests were protected at every turn. The resulting agreement was complex but fair. Crestview would license the enhanced algorithm legitimately, with proper attribution and significant ongoing royalties. I would serve as a technical consultant, working directly with their development team to implement the superior version of the technology. Mason would remain at Crestview, though with diminished authority and under close supervision. It was a substantial fall from grace, but not the complete destruction of his career that might have resulted from a public legal battle. Most surprisingly, my parents began to see our relationship with new clarity. After their initial shock and denial, they'd requested a detailed explanation of what had happened. I provided documentation along with Walter's independent assessment. My father, with his accounting background, was particularly affected by the paper trail showing how my work had been appropriated without credit. We didn't see it, my mother admitted during a difficult conversation at their home. We always assumed Mason's success was entirely his own, and your struggles were. She trailed off, unable to finish. Were my fault, I completed for her. Because I didn't follow the conventional path. Yes, my father acknowledged. We measured success by a very narrow standard. We failed you by not recognizing your achievements on their own terms. It wasn't a complete reconciliation. Too many years of favoritism couldn't be erased in a single conversation, but it was a beginning. The most unexpected development came from Kayla Whitfield, who contacted me about potentially using our security technology for her environmental nonprofit's sensitive donor database. Over coffee to discuss the possibility, she mentioned that Amber had moved temporarily to New York. To get some perspective. She's questioning a lot of things, Kayla explained. Not just about Mason, but about the life she thought she wanted. It's actually healthy, even if my parents are having conniptions about the cancelled engagement. And how are you? I asked, finding myself genuinely interested in her answer. Vindicated, she replied with a small smile. I always sensed something off about Mason's perfect facade. Though I have to say, I'm more interested in getting to know his brother these days. That coffee meeting turned into dinner, which turned into more coffee meetings and more dinners. It was early days, but there was a connection there that felt genuine and unexpected, a silver lining I never could have anticipated. By the time the licensing agreement with Crestview was finalized, complete with public recognition of my contribution to the core architecture, my life had transformed completely. Walter and I had expanded our team to manage the growing interest in our technology. My financial future, once so precarious, was now secure. And most importantly, I had finally stepped out of Mason's shadow to stand on my own achievements. Mason and I were still navigating our new relationship, professional collaborators with a complicated personal history. At our most recent meeting, he'd seemed more like the brother I glimpsed in childhood, before competition had twisted our relationship, thoughtful, insightful, and capable of genuine connection. I'm trying to redefine success for myself, he told me. It's not easy after a lifetime of measuring it one way, but I'm working on it. That sounds like actual growth, I'd observed. Painful but necessary. He'd managed a genuine smile. Maybe you can give me some pointers. You've been doing it your own way all along. As I reflected on everything that had changed, I realized that true wealth wasn't measured by account balances or job titles. It came from creating something authentic, from maintaining integrity even when the path was difficult. Mason had accumulated all the trappings of success but had been hollow inside. I had built something real, and in doing so, had found not just professional validation but personal fulfillment. 6 months after the fateful engagement party, I stood at the window of our new company headquarters in Cambridge, watching the snow fall gently on the Charles River. The past half-year had brought changes I could never have anticipated when I clutched that small gift box and walked into the Fairmont Copley Plaza. The day after our agreement with Crestview was finalized, the Boston Business Journal ran a feature story. Sullivan algorithm revolutionizes data security. Brothers' rivalry leads to industry breakthrough. The article detailed both the technological innovation and the complicated path to proper attribution. It painted neither Mason nor me as villain or hero, but rather as complex individuals who had found a way forward from a difficult situation. That balanced perspective had helped facilitate what came next, a wave of interest from major technology and financial firms seeking to license our enhanced security protocol. Walter's prediction about drama being good marketing had proven surprisingly accurate. Another offer came in this morning, Walter announced, entering my office with a tablet displaying the latest figures. FinSecure wants exclusive rights for the banking sector. Their initial bid is substantial. He showed me the number, which would have seemed like fantasy just a year ago. What do you think? I asked, though I already knew his answer. I think exclusivity limits our options unnecessarily. Counter with non-exclusive terms at a higher annual rate. Walter had become not just a mentor but a true business partner, his decades of industry experience complementing my technical knowledge perfectly. Agreed. And the Crestview implementation? Proceeding on schedule. Trevor's team is making good progress integrating the enhanced protocol. Walter paused. Mason has been surprisingly cooperative. Helpful, even. That aligned with my own observations. Mason had approached our new professional relationship with unexpected humility. During technical meetings, he asked thoughtful questions and deferred to my expertise without the condescension that had characterized our previous interactions. Something fundamental had shifted in him, perhaps not a complete transformation, but a meaningful change nonetheless. News about Mason's personal life came primarily through Kayla, who had become a significant presence in my life. Amber had returned from New York and formally ended their engagement, a decision Mason had apparently accepted with grace. According to Kayla, Amber had enrolled in a photography course and was rediscovering interests she'd abandoned to fit the perfect socialite mold. My relationship with my parents had also evolved into something healthier. They'd made genuine efforts to understand my work, with my father even taking an online course in basic programming concepts so he could better grasp what I did. My mother had tearfully apologized for years of comparing me unfavorably to Mason, acknowledging that she had failed to see my unique strengths. We're selling the house, she'd announced during their most recent visit. It's too big for just us, and we're thinking of getting a condo in Cambridge. The unspoken addition, to be closer to me, was touching. The investigation at Crestview had concluded with significant changes to their intellectual property protocols. Bradley had been quietly reassigned to a less prominent role, while Trevor had been promoted to lead a new ethics compliance team. Mason remained, his title intact, but his responsibilities refocused on client relationships rather than technical acquisitions. Most surprisingly, Mason had reached out privately with information about other developers whose work might have been inappropriately used by Crestview or similar firms. These should be properly attributed as well, he'd said simply. Whether this was genuine redemption or calculated reputation management wasn't entirely clear, but the impact for those developers was real regardless of his motivation. My phone buzzed with a calendar reminder: lunch with Mason. These monthly meetings had become our way of rebuilding some semblance of a brotherly relationship, separate from our professional interactions. They were sometimes awkward, occasionally tense, but increasingly genuine. As I gathered my coat and headed out into the snow, I reflected on the lessons of the past year. Success built on deception was inherently unstable, a house of cards waiting to collapse. True innovation required not just good ideas but the integrity to develop them honestly and the perseverance to see them through difficulties. Mason was waiting at our usual table when I arrived, looking more relaxed than I'd seen him in years. Gone was the perfectly tailored power suit, replaced by smart casual attire that suggested a man more comfortable in his own skin. "How's the new place?" he asked after we'd ordered. He'd recently moved from his luxury downtown condo to a smaller apartment in Back Bay. "Good. Different." He smiled slightly. "Turns out I don't actually need 3,000 square feet and a private elevator to be comfortable." "Who would have thought?" He acknowledged the gentle teasing with a nod. "I had a call with Mom yesterday. She mentioned they're looking at places near you." "Yeah, apparently Dad is excited about the prospect of auditing some classes at MIT. "That's unexpected." Mason seemed genuinely pleased. He never showed interest in technology before. "People can surprise you when given the chance." "Speaking of surprises," Mason said, sliding a folder across the table, "I wanted to show you this before it becomes official." Inside was a formal letter of resignation addressed to Crestview's board of directors. "You're leaving?" "Starting fresh." Mason looked both nervous and excited. "I'm launching a small venture capital firm focused on early-stage developers with innovative ideas but limited business experience. Providing not just funding but mentorship and ethical guidance." He met my eyes directly. "Using what I've learned, both good and bad, to help others avoid the mistakes I made." "That's actually a great idea," I said, genuinely impressed. "Your experience could be valuable if channeled the right way." "That's what I'm hoping." He hesitated. "Actually, I wanted to ask if you'd consider serving as a technical advisor. Not full-time, just consulting on the viability of potential investments. You see possibilities in technologies that most financial people miss." The offer was unexpected. "I need to discuss it with Walter." "Of course. No pressure. Just consider it." As our conversation continued, touching on everything from business to Kayla's latest environmental campaign to our parents' downsizing plans, I realized we were having perhaps the first adult conversation of our lives as equals, neither competing nor posturing, but simply connecting as brothers. Later that evening, as I recounted the lunch to Kayla over dinner, she observed, "It sounds like you're both finally free of the roles you've been playing your whole lives." "I think we are," I agreed. "Though it's still strange territory. The question is," she said thoughtfully, "what will you build now that you're free to define success on your own terms?" It was the perfect question, one I was still answering through my choices each day. The path forward wasn't about competing with Mason or anyone else. It was about creating something meaningful, something that reflected my values and utilized my unique abilities. The journey from that engagement party confrontation to today had taught me that true wealth came not from accumulation or acclaim, but from creation and integrity. Success wasn't a destination or a comparison to others. It was the courage to follow your own path even when others couldn't see its value. Mason and I would never have a simple relationship. Too much history lay between us for that. But we had found a way forward based on mutual respect rather than competition. His fall from grace had forced him to reconsider what truly mattered, while my emergence from his shadow had given me the confidence to stand firmly in my own achievements. As for the future, it remained unwritten, full of both challenges and possibilities. But for perhaps the first time in my life, I faced it not as Mason's younger brother, but simply as Ethan Sullivan, on my own terms and by my own definition of success. What about you? Have you ever had to stand up to someone who took credit for your work or talents? How did you handle it? Drop your story in the comments below, and if this resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more real-life experiences. Remember, your path to success doesn't have to look like anyone else's. Sometimes the greatest victory isn't defeating others, but becoming the most authentic version of yourself. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.